What's going on, everybody? Here at Lincoln Financial Field, the site of the Eagles. Yes, they did win the game. I know it might not feel that way, but the site of their 19-10 win over the Oakland Raiders on Christmas night. So obviously, first we'll start this off. Merry Christmas, everybody. Merry Christmas, Matt. Happy to be here doing this, I guess.
Merry Christmas to you, Eliot. And what we learned tonight after the Eagles' 19-10 win is you and I won't be getting on an airplane until the Eagles potentially go to a Super Bowl in Minnesota. They avoid a road game in Minnesota at some point during the playoffs, which I don't know about you. That's not a trip I was looking forward to.
Yeah, I was not, yeah.
But a lot more questions were raised about this team, even though they got the win and even though they got the job done.
Yeah, so I think the best way to kind of start this off is, well, first, I think we should each say one positive thing since it's Christmas. But I put a tweet out after the game, and I asked, the Eagles clinched number 1 seed. They won the game. Do you feel better or worse about this team's playoff chances? 2,500 votes in, we're at 84% saying they feel worse. So I think the fact that I would agree we both probably feel worse about this isn't, us being negative or trolling. I think a lot of the fans feel worse after this. I think, we just came up from the locker room talking to the players. I know Lane Johnson said, look, they're happy to win, but only scored 13 points on offense. A lot of the offensive guys, you talked to the defensive guys, so you probably got a little bit of a different answer because they did play well tonight. But the offensive guys said they didn't feel good about how the game went for them tonight, and with good reason. I mean, the offense was terrible.
Yeah, I wrote about this on the site right at the gun that, this team has faced a boatload of adversity this entire month, whether it's going on the road and losing to Seattle, losing Carson Wentz for the season with a torn ACL the next week, giving up over 500 yards of total offense and over 435 yards of passing to Eli Manning and the Giants last week, and tonight having to come back and win on a Jake Elliott field goal to break a 10-10 tie, and then, of course, you have the fumble Ruski on the lateral that you score the go-ahead touchdown to make it.
Brutal last-second cover, by the way.
Yeah, 19-10, and if you had it at Eagles -10, you didn't get your cover because, again, similar to the Rams game, they kneeled down on the extra point attempt. But, if we want to talk about positives, I'll give you two. I'll give you the one you asked for and a bonus. Number one, they overcame a little bit more adversity tonight, albeit against an inferior opponent in the Raiders. And number two, a lot of the defensive players talked about this, that last week they didn't play well at all. They gave up a lot of points, they gave up a lot of yards, but it was the offense and Nick Foles that bailed them out, whereas tonight, this offense couldn't get out of its own way, couldn't get any traction in the running game, couldn't get anything going in the passing game. They averaged 3.5 yards per play, which I'd have to look this up, but I'm going to assume that's the low on the year. But at the end of the day, it was the defense and Ronald Darby redeeming himself with that interception that set up the game-winning drive and ultimately helped them win this football game. So two positives from me, overcame some more adversity, and the defense bailed the offense out similarly to the offense bailing the defense out last week.
Yeah, my positive would be the running game. Early on, especially on their first touchdown drive, they really leaned on the running game. I think 9 of the first 10 play calls on that first touchdown drive that resulted in a Jay Ajayi screen pass, which is a pass, but, Foles threw it basically a yard to the right. So it wasn't, Foles didn't do much. The running backs carried them on that drive. Now, the only thing is for the game, they finished with 21 carries, 78 yards for 3.7, which isn't bad, but it certainly, I don't think, speaks how well they played. I thought Jay Ajayi played really well tonight. Every time he had the ball, especially in the first half, yes, he did have that fumble, which was bad. There's no denying that. But in the first half, at least, I thought when he had the ball, he looked like he was a threat to break it every single time. It looked like he had some extra pep in his step. And I think he probably knew coming in that they were going to get the ball a ton. He had it 14 times. Felt like he touched it a lot more than that, though. Three catches and where he had the touchdown. So he had 73 total yards of offense, which is one of his better games in Eagles uniform. But before we get into Foles, the thing is, if they're going to win in the playoffs, they're going to have to do it with defense and running. And that is kind of how they did it tonight. Besides the Ajayi fumble, the running game I thought really carried the offense. The passing game
only finished with 78 rushing yards, though. And I know
but I think they played better than that.
Yeah, I think in the first quarter, when it looked like they were going to establish the run and ground and pound, it looked like, okay, this is a formula that's going to win you games in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And then Doug Peterson got away from it, and you started to throw your way into some trouble. And maybe part of that is panicking after the Amari Cooper 63-yard touchdown where Jalen Mills bid on a double move, and you felt like you needed to somehow get your receiving game involved. Maybe you needed to, get your quarterback into a rhythm. But it just wasn't working. And they never really got back to running the football either. So I think that if you want to project out what this game might mean in terms of how it played out, if you're Doug Peterson and you're Frank Reich and you're Deuce Staley, you got to figure out to get some sustained success on the ground because the weather's not going to get any better. The opponents and the defenses aren't going to get any easier. And you're going to have to, if tonight is any indication, lean on your running game because Nick Foles, his limitations came to the forefront in this offense tonight.
Absolutely. And, I mean, look, another positive I'll say is this. You started off by mentioning it, and obviously it's one of the big stories from this game. They're the number 1 seed now. So they're not going to have to go to Minnesota. They don't have to go to Seattle. They don't have to go to L.A. They're not going to have to go to Carolina. They definitely don't have to go to New Orleans. That's really good news for this team because, look, I think they're 10-0 now at home this season. Or, no, that can't possibly be right.
They're 7-0.
7-0, right. I think I was including preseason or something. But yeah, I think they've won their last 10
They've
here.
won
Maybe
their last
that's what
10
it
here
is.
dating back to last year. Yeah.
Right. So, obviously, they've been an impressive team at home. Now, a lot of their toughest opponents have come on the road, and that just is what it is. But there's no denying the fact that, they have the Cowboys game next week, then they're going to have a week off. The fact they open this at home is a huge advantage to them. I mean, even just today, walking into the stadium, it was cold. I mean, it was cold, it was windy, and, some of these teams are going to come in, that's not going to matter. But a team like New Orleans, a team like the Rams, it's going to be an advantage to the fact that they're at home. So when we talk about this team, we talk about, the struggles at quarterback, some of the struggles on defense, the fact that, they didn't clinch a playoff spot tonight. They clinched the number 1 overall seed. That's a huge deal. I mean, if they had clinched like the number 6 seed, then, we'd talk about it, but it's like, why even bother? They're not going to They're not going to the Super Bowl. I still don't think they're going to the Super Bowl. I think the fans are right to feel worse after this game. I think you saw the major limitations with Foles as opposed to Wentz. But they win one game. If they win their first playoff game at home, you're in the conference championship. And then who knows what happens. So, it is a huge deal. And I think you're right. The fact that they are showing they know how to win games. And I always say about quarterbacks, a sign of a good quarterback is a know how to win. I mean, I think Foles is not a good quarterback.
Well,
so
I'm the thing.
Taking away my own point, but he is 2-0 as a starter.
Right,
now.
And I don't know that we can say that Nick Foles doesn't know how to win, but I will say this. The way that they have to win with Nick Foles, it's so much different than the way that they could win with Carson Wentz. And I think tonight you really saw the limitations of the offense with Nick Foles combined with the value of Carson Wentz. 2 key areas. Number 1, third down. They were 1 of 14 on third down tonight. When Carson Wentz was healthy and in the game throughout the course of the season, they were the number 1 rated third down offense in the NFL, close to 50% conversion rate. Nowhere close to that tonight.
No, they were, 1 of 14 tonight?
Yep, 1 of 14 on the game against the Raiders tonight. But if you want to just look even bigger picture and what that means that the defense is on the field for longer. The Raiders had the ball for 34 minutes. The Eagles had it for 25.
Wow.
You put more pressure on your defense because you're getting more possessions into your opponent. And that's one of the things we talked about back when we were in the LA Coliseum was that without Carson Wentz and those Harry Houdini acts of escapability from the pocket and converting on third downs, you put stress on your defense. You then create the opportunity if you do give up points and you do give up yards like you did burying yourself in a 20-7 hole against the Giants last week, where your defense is under a lot of stress and your quarterback is under a lot of pressure to come up big in big spots. And Nick Foles tonight, I don't think he was very accurate. I think that he sailed a couple of balls really high, particularly to Zach Ertz, one of which almost got him killed down along the goal line. Another one that if it's just a little bit lower, maybe he hauls in a touchdown and it changes the scope of the entire game. But I think that we saw tonight the Eagles built a lot of their success this season on offense around Carson Wentz's escapability and his ability to make plays on third down and move the chains, keep possessions going. And Nick Foles just doesn't have that in him. And it's one of the limitations that he has. So now you have to rely on running the ball. Now you have to rely on dinking and dunking down the field. And I just don't know that when you get into the postseason against some of these defenses and some of these quarterbacks that know how to light up a scoreboard, I don't know if that's sustainable.
So we're about 10 minutes into the podcast. We've been pretty positive so far. I think it's time to get into the negative for tonight. And you touched on it there, but let me put it in simpler terms. This team is not going anywhere with Nick Foles at quarterback. I don't care how – I don't care. I mean, you can take this soundbite, and if they're holding the Lombardi trophy at the end of it, I'll admit I was wrong, but – They're not going anywhere with Nick Foles. I mean, even tonight, so that final drive, the drive where he gets the ball at the Eagles' 48-yard line. So they're basically, 20, 25 yards away from field goal range as it is. He gets a 5-yard completion, an 8-yard completion to Aguilar, where Aguilar did most of the work, a 4-yard completion, a 4-yard completion, and an incomplete pass to Corey Clement on 3rd and 2. Me or you would have had a half-decent shot of completing those passes. I mean, they were just in the flat, straight out to the side. Like, there was nothing Nick Foles did tonight that was impressive to me. I don't think he had any moment where I said, all right, there you go.
Yeah, what was the signature play? I don't know that he had a signature play.
I can't think of it. I mean,
and you don't need one every game.
Well, honestly, the signature play was probably the pass that should have been intercepted but was dropped by Reggie Nelson. I mean, that was terrible. The Eagles are really, really lucky that was not intercepted. And to me, the biggest thing that shows how bad he was, and you touched on it, was what do you have, 23 yards leading into that final drive, passing in the second half?
Yeah.
I mean, they were able to get nothing going. And so this is kind of how, you mentioned it, but yeah, they got to win with running the ball. They got to win with defense. At the end of the day, you have to have a quarterback in the playoffs that can make plays for you, not execute the offense, not, just not turn it over. You need a quarterback that can make plays for you. And Nick Foles is not that guy. You saw it tonight. He can't really handle pressure. He can't throw on the run. You could see the noticeable difference between when he's at quarterback and when Wentz is, just in the way that the ball is delivered. I mean, Wentz gets it out. By the time the receivers are making their cuts, the ball's right there for him. I mean,
Carson Wentz throws people open. He threw receivers open throughout the course of the year. Nick Foles needs to throw to open receivers, and the receivers weren't getting a lot of separation tonight. And even what you'd consider a relatively tight window, but not necessarily one where you compliment the quarterback for fitting it into a really tight window.
Right.
Those are tough throws for Nick Foles. He needs the
every
receivers
throw
to
is
be
a
open.
tough throw for Nick Foles. I mean, look at this stat line today. Let me pull it up. I mean, he had one interception, which is pretty wild.
He was 19 of 38 for 163. He was sacked twice. And Eliot, I'll just keep going back to hammering this point. They were 1 for 14 on 3rd down.
And really, that's how and the stat that you said last time to me was extremely telling. The Raiders had the ball 9 more minutes than the Eagles tonight.
Yep.
3rd down, time of possession. That's how the Eagles have been winning this season, and that's a lot. That's how they went 7-9 last year. I mean, they were in a lot of games because they were good with time of possession. And I don't remember about 3rd down, but this year it has been 3rd down. They're not going to win playing this brand of football, and that's the thing. I saw Sidney Jones tweet after the game, and this was kind of the message a lot of players said afterwards. Good teams find a way to win, and yeah, that's true. But this team, they're finding ways to beat really bad teams, and they're playing down. I mean, how many teams in the league do they win? Do they beat over these last 2 weeks playing the way they did? They're certainly not beating any team that's heading towards the playoffs.
No, I agree. And I think that when you look at the hierarchy in the NFC right now, yes, they're the number 1 seed. Yes, they have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And that's huge. You have 2 home games, and it's in Philadelphia in late January. So you could get some snow mixed in there. You could get some really, nasty winds like we saw tonight with gusts upwards of 25 miles an hour. And like you touched on earlier, a team like Atlanta, a team like New Orleans, maybe even, especially the Rams coming from the West Coast, not much playoff experience, that could really impact a game. And that's all well and good, and that helps you. But I think that when you look at the hierarchy of the NFC, you can't look at the Eagles and the way they're playing right now and say they're the best team in the NFC. I think that if you were having just a power ranking of these 6 potential playoff teams, I'd say right now, Eliot, based on what we've seen the last 2 weeks, they're number 5 or number 6. And I do think that there is something for finding a way to win in the NFL. I do understand and relate to a lot of players and coaches when they say that it's a tough league to win in, and every win is a win, a win is a win, regardless of how it looks. And this isn't college football where you need style points. But I just don't know how you match up against a team that has such a menacing defense as the Minnesota Vikings.
Carolina Panthers have a good defense.
Carolina Panthers have a good defense and a quarterback who seems to be peaking over the last 2 or 3 weeks. You have Jared Goff, Todd Gurley, and a really good defense in the Rams who you struggled with, even though Carson Wentz threw 4 touchdowns. And you look at some other teams like Atlanta with a reigning MVP, a team that almost won the Super Bowl, guys like Julio Jones on the outside. And then you have, a Hall of Fame quarterback in Drew Brees with Alvin Kamara and Ingram.
Mark Ingram.
2 dominant, young, between the tackles running backs that can really change the impact of a game. And I don't know where you rank the Eagles above any of those teams the way they're playing of late.
You can't. And now let's talk about the defense before we get into a complete power ranking type of thing. But the defense today all right, the encouraging part was the 5 turnovers. I mean, Malcolm Jenkins making a huge play. Ronald Darby made a huge play. I'm honest to God not trying to discredit him, but that was a terrible throw by Derek Carr that literally went right to him.
Patrick Robinson as well, when it was a really bad underthrow that Robinson intercepted. He had good coverage, and he didn't let the receiver beat him over the top or anything, but it was another underthrow by Derek Carr. And I'm not trying to, and I know you're not trying to discredit the defense either, but this was just another mediocre quarterback performance in a long line of those that this secondary has feasted on this year.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. The other area of concern on the defense was Jalen Mills. Did have a pass breakup late, which was good. But he really should have picked the ball off. But he bit yet again on a double move that resulted in, how many yards was that? Like a 60-something yard touchdown?
63-yard touchdown
63
to
yard.
Cooper, yep.
He's got to play better. I mean,
Yep.
Coming off of Ronald Darby last week, they were both biting on double moves last week. Jalen Mills does it again. The book is kind of out on how you beat these Eagles corners. After the beginning of the year where they were playing better than a lot of people expected, including us, the book's out now. They bite on double moves. They're very aggressive. They're susceptible to jumping routes. And you've seen the last 2 weeks. And again, these are teams with Derek Carr, I think at one point was a very good quarterback. This year, for whatever reason, he has not been. So you can't really say they're facing good. They haven't faced a good quarterback either the last 2 weeks. Amari Cooper is a good receiver. He's struggled a little bit just because the whole offense has, and he struggled with drops this year. But again, not great receivers the last 2 weeks, and they're getting beat up and down the field. Today they came up with turnovers, and they did get put in some tough spots, but I still think there was some concerning aspects of the defense's performance today.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you said, and I do agree that the book is out on how to beat this secondary, the double moves, going over the top on them. Remember, this is a secondary that led the league in X plays over the last 2 years prior to this season. They've been better this year. I'd contend that a lot of the success of the secondary is due to the fact that you played a lot of quarterbacks like C.J. Beathard and Brock Osweiler, a lot of middle-of-the-road quarterbacks for about a 6 or 7 game stretch. A rookie, Mitchell Trubisky, thrown in there, a backup quarterback with the Arizona Cardinals. And I just think that this secondary made its bones and played above its head against really weak quarterback play. But tonight, I give them a lot of credit because, yes, we can point to the Jalen Mills mistake, and that was a really bad play. It was a bad look, particularly after the game the secondary had against the Giants last week. But, Eliot, they held Derek Carr and the Raiders to 77 passing yards other than that one long completion. So you can say that they gave up a bad play, but they also had 5 turnovers, one of which a Ronald Darby interception that set up the game-winning field goal drive. So while I think you can look at it both ways, I don't think that this is a night to hammer the play of the secondary and the defense because they did recover nicely from that bad Jalen Mills blunder.
Agreed. I'm just saying if we're looking at every single game from here on out in terms of, will this get it done in the playoffs? Clearly the 5 turnovers they ended up with will get it done. I still think, though, the secondary needs to play better than it did tonight.
I agree.
I just think, Jalen Mills getting beat. But again, that's just one play. Maybe I'm being overly harsh.
And here's the thing in your defense and kind of underscoring the point we're trying to make. When you get into playoff games, like we saw against the Rams, like we saw against the Seahawks, and we've hammered this to death over the last 2 or 3 games, 1 or 2 plays is going to make all the difference in the world. And if Jalen Mills gets beat on one double move or Ronald Darby bites on a play fake and they give up a big play over the top, that could change the outcome of a playoff game because especially now when you don't have that transcendent level quarterback play that you were getting for much of the season with Carson Wentz, 1 or 2 mistakes on defense, that can kill you come postseason time, and that's what almost cost them tonight.
So we'll have a lot, we'll have 2 or 3 days to think about this. I guess, we'll probably do the hot take pod on Wednesday.
Yep.
So we'll have a day or 2 to think about it. But let me just put this out here to start. So number one seed clinched, nothing to play for next week against the Cowboys. You're going to have the bye week, and then you'll have your home playoff game. Do you play the starters next week against Dallas?
Yeah, you and I have debated this a lot on the podcast, in the media room, at practice. I was coming into tonight thinking that once you locked it up, you rest the starters. I don't feel that way anymore. I think that, you look at what Nick Foles did tonight, you look at the offense just not being able to get out of its own way. I don't think you can go 3 weeks between now and playing a playoff game with that product on the field. I think that you have to mitigate some of the risk against injury. So if I'm Doug Peterson, I'm putting together a preseason game plan where I give the starters a quarter, I play them for the first quarter, I get them some work, and I get them out of there. I think you need to get them some work, get them some time to work on their chemistry. You got to try to spend these next 5 or 6 days leading into the Cowboy game putting together an offensive scheme that highlights whatever you think is going to work with Nick Foles and with this running game, because you can't game plan the offense the way you did with Carson Wentz. As much as they wanted to talk about nothing changing and running their system, we've seen now over tonight that won't work with Nick Foles.
Right.
If he plays the way he did tonight, that won't work. So you need to figure out in a game situation, even for just a quarter, you need to figure out what that looks like and how it works before you go into the playoffs.
And here's the thing, too. Like, I'm not saying the loss of Lane Johnson wouldn't matter, because it would. He's probably the one player you can least afford to lose at this point. But Lane Johnson played tonight, and they still only scored 13 points. So on the offensive side of the ball, I'm not as concerned about playing the defensive guys. I mean, at this point, they are who they are. Jalen Mills is not going to benefit from playing another week. Malcolm Jenkins is not. Fletcher Cox is not.
I think they could use a rest, too.
Yeah, honestly.
Based on what we've seen the last 2 weeks, I think that the defense could really stand to benefit from resting the starters, giving those guys a couple weeks to recover.
There's no reason to have Fletcher Cox out there in a lot of ways. But on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, look, like, is it really going to be that much different if they have Nate Sudfeld in there? I mean, Foles was terrible tonight. And I'm not saying that Nick Foles isn't better than Nate Sudfeld, but the offense you saw tonight, it's not like losing a starter is really going to matter. The way they played tonight is not going to get it done. It's clear that Foles has to get on the same page with his outside receivers. I mean, in the first half, I think he only targeted outside receivers 4 times, and 2 of them were Nelson Aguilar, who is a slot guy, but I mean, it's still a receiver at the end of the day. Let's see, how many targets did Alshon have tonight? It is not a lot.
And he did not talk to the media afterwards.
He did not. He did not. A lot of the offensive guys did not talk to the media today. Alshon Jeffrey, 2 targets, no catches. Torrey Smith, 5 targets, 1 catch for 5 yards. Aguilar, 7, 4 catches, 35 yards. But still, so you're talking about 40 yards receiving from Aguilar, Jeffrey, and Smith. And Smith said after the game, well, that's just part of the way it goes sometimes. I mean, there were weeks he would have light targets. There's weeks he would have none even when Wentz was in there. And that's true, but the difference is you had some track record of success, whereas you don't really have that with Foles. So I think you absolutely put Foles out there. I think you play the majority of the starters. If you had any option besides Lane, I would say maybe don't play him in Kelsey, but you really don't. I don't think they play Wisniewski just because of his ankle. I think he could play if it was the playoffs. But at this point, too, like, Wisniewski's going to go how many weeks without playing now?
Yeah.
5?
But he's another guy, and Brandon Graham tonight with his ankle, that's kind of a little bit of an unknown.
And he seemed fine after the game.
Right, and he said that it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. But still, it's an injury you're dealing with.
I'll always say this. I remember being in, I think it was Indianapolis Colts Stadium, or no, it was the Dallas Cowboys Stadium 2 years ago. Jordan Hicks, after the game, said he's absolutely fine, nothing to worry about. Next day, he was placed on season-ending IR.
Yep.
I'm not saying Brandon Graham is not. I think Brandon Graham plays in the playoffs. The only point I'm making is players are always very positive.
I totally agree. And they're always going to say they're going to play and always going to say they're feeling fine. But I think that you have anybody who's banged up, whether it's Jalen Mills, still dealing with an ankle injury the other week. Tonight, looked like he went down briefly, then came back in the game. Brandon Graham, Wisniewski. You need these guys healthy in the playoffs. You don't need them playing in Week 17.
So we're in agreement you would start Foles.
I'd start Foles. I'd play the offensive starters maybe a quarter, maybe into the second quarter.
What do you do if they struggle? You get them out of there?
I think you just get them out of there and you take the bye week to regroup and try to go back to the drawing board.
Just try to find Wentz in ACL.
Yeah, I think you need to mitigate the injury risk against the Cowboy team. Let's face it, maybe they'd want to take a shot next week at playing spoiler in any way possible.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we're both in agreement on 2 things. One, you feel worse after this game for their playoff chances?
Yeah, I mean, I went into this game thinking there was a chance they could win 1 playoff game. Now I'm not so sure that can happen.
Yeah, so I definitely feel worse. I went in kind of feeling a little bit maybe they would have some shot in the first run. At this point, they're not winning a playoff game if they play like this. I mean, Foles would have to really shock everybody with a big game for them to win, and I think the chances of that are slim. And we're both in agreement they would play the starters for some capacity next week.
Yep. I think you have to on offense.
I agree. So, everyone, tell us what you think about that stuff. We forgot to tweet it after the game, unfortunately, but we need your hot takes for the pod. You can tweet them at hashtag the no-huddle show or email us at the no-huddle show at NJ.com. We always read all the hot takes on the Tuesday pod. We'll react to them. And a lot to talk about this week between Foles, the defense, should they or shouldn't they play the starters? What are their playoff chances now they've locked up number 1? So everyone, please do that. And then if you're still listening at this point, we appreciate your 5-star reviews or any review, really. Maybe a 5-star review with some comments. We've heard you guys about maybe us being too negative. We're still going to be honest with you, but we started off with some positivity today, so it's Christmas. So we do read the reviews, we do listen to our feedback, and we appreciate everyone that's done it. So, Matt, tomorrow's Tuesday already, coming off this Monday night game, but I will talk to you for the Hot Take Pod on Wednesday.
Talk to you Wednesday. Merry Christmas to everybody out there listening.